I remember a long ass time ago, Nintendo used to be a current up-to-date system, setting the standard for different genres of gameplay for years to come. During that time, they dropped what was considered a masterpiece, earning a 99% rating, which meant, holy this game is good, everyone needs to play it. During that same time, Nintendo took less than 2 years to flip that idea and create another masterpiece, reusing pieces of their first 3D Zelda, but creating a new world and a whole new playstyle and doing something completely different with it. That game earned a measly 95, which still meant the game was incredible, and sure enough, it went on to be a fan favorite and a GOAT in the series. Fast forward a couple decades and Nintendo breaks the mold again, flipping the series on its ass in a new way and earning a 97. And in the same fashion, bits and pieces of that game were reused to create another sequel, which earned a 96, higher than their previous sequel. Only problem is this sequel reuses basically everything from the previous game, while adding another maybe 30% in new content, and is full of poorly executed actions within the game that make playing it a chore half the time. The game also isn't a sequel at all, but just a case of reusing the whole game, but wiping the story and replacing it with a new one, and out of the ashes, Tears of the Asswipe is born. I try not to get too hyped for games. Thankfully, this one made it easy to stick to that since they didn't really sell me on it until a month prior. Let me just clarify that unlike most people, I didn't care that the same world was being reused. As long as the game slaps, then that's fine with me. When I saw the final trailer, it appeared that it would yes indeed be fire, and that was kind of right. The game was actually pretty addicting. I high-key played it for over 2 months every day in all of my spare time, literally. I was playing it while I was walking on the sidewalk, while standing in line at the bank, even while in the bathroom shitting. I was playing this game everywhere. Every day at work, I couldn't even focus because I just wanted to go play Tears of the Kingdom. What was I doing while playing it? Mostly just struggling my way through goofy, petty gameplay. I can tell you most of the time wasn't spent exploring and making cool discoveries. Now, people say the game is Breath of the Wild again, and I gotta be honest, yeah, kind of, but at the same time, no. Yes, the world is the same, the gameplay is basically the same, many of the characters are the same, but this didn't really feel like Breath of the Wild to me. Maybe it's simply because of the different focuses, but this just felt like Zelda in a different way. Breath of the Wild was all about the exploring and shit. This game seemed to push me more to follow the story, which is one thing I personally look for in a Zelda game. Yes, I know the stories historically aren't the best, but we'll talk more about the story later. The copy and paste divine beasts have been cut and replaced with actual themed temples. The sparse NPC interaction and shitty side quests have been replaced with a lot more volume and mini-stories. The dickhead blight bosses have been replaced with unique bosses that actually fit the theme of their dungeons. There's also more enemy variety added, and the fights themselves are kind of better. Kind of. And most important to me, as I said, the story is much deeper and fleshed out a lot more. It seems like a lot has been done, but what's been done and why it's been done is questionable to say the least. When I first watched the final trailer, I was like, holy f***, this looks good. And then I watched it a few more times and was like, damn, this might be showing me too much. Fans have been obsessed with the Zonai since Breath of the Wild, just dying to know who this mysterious dead race is. Just starting the game, I don't know, walking in this cave with Zelda felt Zelda-like. I was like, sweet, this looks like the start of an interesting story where I can learn a lot about... Damn, they sure throw it at you. Barely 30 seconds into the game and the story is half answered already. I thought they'd show up at some point during the game, but nope, you literally learn at the opening cutscene basically. Zonai created Hyrule, and the first king was Zonai. His ghost leads you around the tutorial area to fill you in more, but like, what the I mean, alright, cool. Maybe it's a good thing because of the non-linearity of the storytelling, and there's a lot of info in this story, so we should just get the bases out of the way. But like, is there no progression? You get your 4 basic powers, which come from having his dead hand attached. Boom! And learn how to use them, while also learning a god-awful amount about their technology, the automatons that mine the island, as well as the key ingredients of their tech, a mineral comically named Zonite. Literally LOL at the name. Like, I get the Zonai having a presence in this game is cool, but like, This is like if electricity was called humanite. Is that a heart beating in your chest? Nope, it's just a human charge. It's like when the writers were naming shit in the game, they were just like,
land monster, branch monster.
Although it's not as good as the Great Plateau, the Great Sky Island is decent, I guess. There's a flux construct on it that I didn't even bother with because I kind of forgot about it after making my rounds, and apparently I missed a whole gumball machine before I left. The Great Sky Island tries to lead you through a straightforward path, but it's so choppy and scattered and weird that I still missed the whole boss and didn't even notice or care. Maybe I was just in a hurry and interested in seeing the surface and how it's changed. And after you open the door to the actual Temple of Time and do a few short puzzles, that's exactly where you go. And I soon learned that the choppy, sloppy, gloppy Sky Islands connected by a loose invisible story string is the layout for the entire game. Once heading to the surface, basically the first place anybody would naturally go is the new Lookout Landing, a small fort built in front of the castle. This is where you get reacquainted with the world, and eventually through context clues you learn that several, maybe even 4 or 5 years have passed since Breath of the Wild. How has it changed? It hasn't. Everything is exactly the same. The game has a number of things going right for it, but this is one of the big wrongs. It's the same villages with a few added buildings, the same ruins, the same destroyed shit from before. This isn't really a shot at the developers, this is a shot at the logic of the game itself. What the fook have the citizens of Hyrule been doing for the last few years? Isn't Zelda's duty as one of the last remaining monarchs to see the rebuilding of the kingdom? What has she been doing? The same dumb shit she was doing before the calamity? While one company is charged with rebuilding the land, yet it seems only the delivery branch is working. Seeing these material caches in the previews, I thought there would be a lot of rebuilding happening, but minus one really bad build your own house side quest, there's literally nothing. Not even another Terrytown type quest, which was a fan favorite from the last game. Nothing new to add and nothing really new added upon starting. Like, I'm not saying there should be a whole new castle, but there's no real central hub here, and it still doesn't feel like Hyrule. It's just a smorgasbord of the same loosely connected towns. Imagine if even like Lon Lon Ranch was rebuilt, or if the castle isn't safe, how about the town in front of the Great Plateau? This could be a view based on my limited knowledge of what the system is even capable of, but I don't know. If all of your hardware goes into powering this big ass world, but it can't put shit in it, then why is the world so big? We have the addition of the Sky Islands, which in a way adds a lot more to see, but they're really kind of as empty and bland as the islands of the Great Sea from Wind Waker. Most of the Sky Islands, if I was flying, I just kind of flew over them.
Let's keep flying.
I could already see everything from the air, and it wasn't worth stopping, potentially losing my hover bike half the time. The real game changer seemed to be the depths. I gotta give credit for them. The depths aren't the fullest place to be, but the fact that there's a whole new world the size of the whole map is a big win against anyone who says it's the same game. Unfortunately, I have to take that credit back because the depths are a literal mirror of the overworld but inversed. So they just kind of reskinned it and added some trees and shit and big mushrooms. And it's the same shit no matter where you are in the world, with the exception of a couple spots. But this does kind of give us a new world to explore. The first time I jumped down into one of these big a-holes, I honestly thought I was just going to respawn at the top. So when I kept falling and things started turning green, I was like, hold up. I'm hit with this dope ass dark sound bit that sounds like I'm being transported into a whole new world. And in a way I am. I was easily getting lost in it and exploring the depths for hours, if for nothing else than simply to collect all the cool shit that you can't really find on the surface. Can't say the same for the enemies though. Other than these turtles and this big frog, the enemies are the exact same ones from the surface except with like rabies or something. Even the temple bosses are down here. Like, what the fuck? Even on the surface, and even with the new variety that's added, there still seems to be a lack of enemies as well. There's hella spots where there used to be a Guardian or Lionel where I thought there would be something different, but instead there's just nothing. I guess the developers thought filling out the surface world more meant just putting strange rocks that allegedly fell from the sky and landed at angles that don't even make sense. At least we do have better monster camps added with a lot more rewards as well as new monsters. During the early stages of the game, I avoided almost all of the monsters because I was tired of being one-shot killed from the weakest losers, and when I did go in for a fight, I was having to redo monster camps over and over and over because a dildo fused to a stick was knocking me back 8 hearts. Aside from that, my weapons were weak as hell at that point, so earlier on, fighting the monsters at all was a real give or take, but the real reward in it was the parts they drop. At first I was like, okay, they added goofy hats on all the enemies to change them up, but it turns out it's all horns, and every level of monster gives a different level of horn that you can fuse to weapons. For the most part, I never really ran low on weapons anymore after I got my flow going. It also creates a lot more weapon variety, and while some of them look stupid as shit, others just look badass. Fusing the arrows was also nice, although a pain in the ass because it takes so long to even find the part you want or need, plus you have to refuse every individual arrow, but it did make attacking with a bow way more fun. As for shields, I seldom really ever fused them. I don't know, I just didn't care to. But the power these fusions added is actually sometimes too strong. Needless to say, it adds a lot more to the fighting, and if you get tired of doing that, build a robot to fight for you until you lose it in a ditch somewhere. You also get the avatars of each of the 4 sages to assist you, and you basically always leave them on, as well as Minoru's construct. So towards the later part of the game, I was just squatting most of monsters and could sometimes just run around and pick up monster parts while my homies did all the work instead. The overworld boss fights seem fewer than before, but that may just be due to swapping them out with more mid-level bosses. I don't know. On some parts, you even go in with a group of highly and pathetic fighters and take out monster camps. The dungeons, although they have next to nothing in the realm of monsters, the bosses were a really nice change. Each boss was unique and made sense of what was going on in that region prior. I know some people said the sludge monster was annoying, but to be honest, I just like the challenge. You can get ridiculously OP in this game, so it seems a bit silly to complain about one of the few times when you actually get to expend some of your power as a player. The Queen Gibdo fight was a non-stop party till the end. Marble Goma was alright, and I forgot the name, Insect Dick or whatever it was called. That was just a fun cinematic fight. And when I fought it again in the underworld, it was a bit more of a challenge since I was fighting in the dark. All of this leads up to the fight with Ganon, which also is much, much better than before. It's a 3-phase battle with a couple of spins as well, and even in its Dark Beast phase, if nothing else, it just looks really badass. A lot of things in this game look badass, where even if it's honestly not the best, the atmosphere adds a lot back to what is lost in the design. Whether it's just looking out across Hyrule, exploring the depths, approaching a temple, or approaching Ganondorf himself, the spirit is definitely there. The temples themselves were still asshole dookie, but the one thing they had going for them was the vibes leading up to and finding them. When I did the first one, the lead up itself was so much I thought that was the dungeon, until I could see the shape of a ship in the clouds. And when I dropped down into the storm and saw a wind temple, I was like, hell yeah, yeah, this is dope as hell. Problem is the temple itself was once again kind of balls. And by kind of, I mean very much so. Yeah, it looks cool, and it has the right spirit, and the scale itself has you set up for a really cool trial. But then when you get inside, all the size means nothing because the rooms are all like 200 feet tall, and it's basically a flying boat-shaped divine beast with like 5 or 6 empty rooms. The fight itself is cool, but this was just sadly a big letdown. All of them kind of fall to this problem. The fire temple, again, looked cool as shit upon reveal, but then doing it was just like, I couldn't tell which rails went which way and resorted to just climbing and flying and cheating to get where I needed to go. Compare that to the damn near masterpiece that was a previous fire temple, and this one just looks like a fresh pile in comparison. The desert temple was definitely my favorite out of them since it felt the most like a traditional dungeon and had a decent interconnected puzzle system. And then the water temple is just a couple random unrelated puzzles on different platforms or areas to make the thing happen. All of these are based around being able to go anywhere in them in any order and just hit the switches to make something happen. But I think the water temple really shows the clearest what the big problem with this is. In older Zelda games, the world was basically still open. Yeah, you needed to unlock certain areas as it progressed, but then you could just kind of run around and do whatever until moving to the next part. But when you got to temples, you would have to follow where the design leads you, and the whole temple would be the puzzle. Yes, there would be small puzzles room by room, but it always led back around to form the bigger picture. In these Tears of the Kingdom temples, it's like putting 4 easy shrines together, one for each switch, and then you open the boss door. Going any direction in these temples is kind of unnecessary because it turns into a toy box of random baby puzzles that don't even really complement each other in any way. In an open world game, I don't think anybody will have an issue with going into a more linear dungeon that actually makes sense. The whole game is freedom to go anywhere and wander. If we're going to add temples back, I don't think it's necessary to do the same thing with those as well. There's also a 5th dungeon that was basically a boring quest of putting together the different pieces of Mineru's construct, a part of the game I could easily have lived without. In the preview, when I saw this thing coming off the wall, first I thought it would be much bigger, but second, I felt like it would be much more important. It's supposed to be. Before I even free her construct, I could tell I would hardly use it because its problems are made very evident in its own boss battle. I was like, God, this thing is slow. It's slow and its range sucks. A pointless reward for a pointless dungeon. To supplement the lack of dungeons, we have shrines back, and this time even more of them. And even early on in the game, I got to a point where I was just unlocking them for warp points, and every now and then would go back and knock a few out so I can get a couple extra spirit orbs, light balls or whatever they're called. And once I maxed my stamina, I didn't really care to do them anymore at all, since damn near infinite pause healing basically made me invincible anyway. The last thing we have are numerous caves that combine as kind of mini trials, but more so just adds more to explore. And to be honest, if there's not an outfit in it, I really don't give a shit. Outside of bubble gems and some clothes and occasionally one bomb flower, they don't really offer much of anything. They weren't even fun to look at. Why couldn't some of them actually have some design? Like this, once again, waste of potential inside the Citadel. I was like, oh sweet, the door's open this time. But then realized I'm just running into another dirty asshole looking cave hole to see the same shit again. I almost turned around at the entrance. Once I stopped caring about the clothes, I stopped caring about the caves. Once I stopped caring about hearts, I stopped caring about shrines. If I didn't care about the story, I wouldn't even care about freeing the regions. And that's something that makes this still mediocre story maybe even more problematic than the last. Breath of the Wild didn't have a great story, but it had a simple one where even the fragmented storytelling got the point across. This one, although it's bigger and far deeper and a bit more interesting, every part it's like, who did what for why and how did they do it at what time? Every cutscene almost is just a bombardment of story elements and exposition. I thought the story characters being dead for just 100 years was high-key detrimental to the story last time. Well, how about these assholes? Who even are these people? Dead characters from thousands of years ago who don't even have faces, and this time with not clearly defined roles in the kingdom or where they even fit into the story. I feel like Sonya only existed as someone for Ganondorf to steal the stone from. The best part of the story is the sacrifice of Zelda, which gets reversed at the end anyway. But I do gotta say, when I watched it, I was like, it was a really nice twist and actually kind of emotional since Zelda's the only character you really care about in the game. But most of this other shit is just so messy and sloppy. The part of the story that is simple is repeated so many times. By the third retelling, I was like, I don't need to hear this again. Couldn't they at least tell different versions from the perspective of their own kind or something? Or each sage tells a different part of it, ordered from wherever you choose to start? How much data does it take to store a few extra story variations? Well, I guess that could be a thing if they even had identities, but they literally hide under masks the whole time and have less personality than the damn constructs. The biggest insult of all this isn't that it rewrites a bunch of Hyrule history anyway, but that it basically rewrites Breath of the Wild. This game is supposed to be a sequel, and I honestly take this personally because one of my favorite Zelda games is Age of Calamity, and most people who bitched about that game, their main complaint was that it was marketed as a prequel, but the timeline goes a different direction. Well, what about this? Everyone is on their knees kissing ass for this game now, but this isn't a sequel to Breath of the Wild. This story has literally nothing to do with the last game. The Guardians, gone. The Divine Beasts, gone. The Shrines, gone. There's not even mentions of the champions from their successors. I was honestly shocked when I got to Zora's Domain and saw that they tore down the fucking Mipha statue and replaced it with Link riding Sidon. How disrespectful to the princess. Her only reference now is this little spring named after her at the top of this mountain. That's it. She may as well have as much significance in this world as whoever the fuck Toto is. There's no mention of Sheikah, the Calamity, or anything. I know it's a standalone game and those things aren't relevant, but then what makes it a sequel, other than that the world and a couple of characters are reused? It's not like a Majora's Mask sequel, where there was a limited timeline to create, and there was a new world created that follows the quest of Link in search of his old friend from the previous game. This is the same world and characters recycled for a whole new story, unrelated to the last, but with the same enemy, also unrelated to the last. It's all just renamed and reskinned. Instead of Calamity Ganon, it's Demon King Ganondorf. Instead of the Calamity, it's the Upheaval. Instead of Sheikah Tech, it's Zonai Tech. Instead of Malice, it's Gloom. And instead of Shrines, it's Shrines. Even the Sheikah Slate is plagiarized as a Purapad. If you put that highly and simply came up with this technology in modern day, you could completely omit Breath of the Wild. Just yeet the whole story from existence and this one would be exactly the same. Don't get me wrong, on the back of all this bitching, honestly love how much certain parts are improved. The dungeons were doo-doo for the most part, but I still like that whole sequence infinitely more than last time. Going to these regions and having these ancient temples linked to their history with an enemy that's actively creating destruction in those areas is a huge improvement. The monster variety is improved a bit as well, and one big area where things are also much better is the people of the world. There's way better NPC interaction this time around, better side quests and so on. The world really feels a lot more alive. In Breath of the Wild, you might occasionally see a street salesman with a donkey or someone getting the shit beat out of them by a monster, but that's mostly it. The side quests half the time were just go somewhere and take a photo of something. This time they're a lot more creative and you see a lot more characters who do a lot more things, including the monster control crew who you can join with in combat. There's also the circle jerkers or whatever they're called that help you unlock each great fairy. I was fine with this since money was a lot harder to come by in this game and I was broke most of the game anyway, so I didn't want to give her 5 bands to come out of her bud just to charge me more money to upgrade the outfits, especially with like twice as many outfits anyway. There's so many fits in this game that charge so much hard to come by shit, and that may be a result of outfits being the only worthwhile thing to find in caves. At least the journeys getting them aren't half bad. Lurelin Village is a side quest itself as it's been taken over by pirates, and to be honest, it kind of sucks ass that the pirates are just more of the same assholes, but it was still kind of fun to do, except for the fucking blood moon! But then rebuilding the town was actually okay. It wasn't always the most fun, but it was far better than just bringing a bunch of random shit. It's just unfortunate that this is the only town building segment. All this flat, empty land in this world, and none of it can be a new settlement. When I first saw these little platforms at Terrytown, I thought that was going to be homes and shit being built. Turns out it's just an obstacle course to learn how to drive cars I'll never drive. The Zonai devices are pretty cool, definitely a dope addition to the game. And one of the funnest things I've gotten from this game is looking at all the cool stuff people come up with. But once I realized there's a 21 piece fuse limit, I'm pretty sure I never built something again, other than hover cycles. Getting auto build enhances the use of them infinitely because it was literally no fun before to spend 20 minutes building a vehicle just to get it stuck somewhere and I couldn't keep it. So once I could just rebuild it from a template, it was much better. But even then, I was still having to leave dope ass machines in random places after using them for barely 5 or 10 minutes. And it just didn't seem worth it using the Zonite for some of this stuff in auto build. Unless something was too high or far and required a vehicle, I basically never used it, except for hover cycles in the depths once I got bored of the copy and paste landscape and just started flying over everything. But one thing I gotta give the developers credit for is the shitload of items that can be put together in a shitload of ways to do a shitload of different shit. And no matter how idiotic and random your contraption is that you stick together, it still has a logical balance to it and still makes sense in the in-game physics. That's definitely a lot, and they were right for banking on that in the polishing stage of the game as something that would need to make sense. A lot of the other polishing though seems non-existent. I don't want to rant about the shortcomings of the graphics, but there's obvious flaws in it. This water, for example, is right at the beginning of the game and it's some of the ugliest shit I've ever seen. It looks like GameCube water, but it's not even hiding. Ugly, ugly, ugly. And there's a few other ugly ass things as well. But at the end of the day, it's a small trade-off in the end. I'll take ugly water in exchange for NPCs with basically a whole life cycle with day and night actions following their own individual schedules, or seemingly endless possibilities of weapons and fusions that work in different ways. For all the shit you lose, you gain a lot as well. The problem is it just seems like a million unfinished ideas crammed into a game on a system that can barely support it all. Sadly, probably the high point of the game for me was the Wind Temple segment between the build-up and the payoff, and after that it just kind of plateaued. It was just addictively mid for another 75 hours until the second time I went after Ganondorf. After completing the 4 regions, I didn't even know how much of the game was left, and I was stalling going to the castle because with the disconnected nature of the game, I couldn't tell how much story there still was and didn't want to end it too early.
Thankfully, it turned out the castle wasn't the inn, but not thankfully, after I got out of it, I learned I'd already did everything else I was supposed to do. So then the only thing left was to go straight back to the castle after Ganondorf. Going back and descending deeper and deeper and deeper into the ground, I was like, bro, how far does this go? But the dope ass music got louder and louder, and it was actually a really nice badass build up to the final fight. And when you finally get there, hordes of jackass weak monsters start attacking, and your friends join in and start backing you up, so it's an all-out battle royale. The 4 bosses show back up, and my partners take them while I go to Ganondorf, and he himself is just a boss-ass Chad in this game. He walks slow and powerful as he should and is just oozing confidence. That asswipe, shitty, ugly-ass steaming pile of dung heap from the last game was a huge middle finger to a good villain, but they definitely fixed that mistake, and this is one of the few good things of having him return as the main enemy again. As I said, it's a 3-phase battle. After the first 2 phases, we get another twist where he rips off his own stone and eats it to turn himself into a dragon, and his dragon is high-key badass looking. This is basically the Dark Beast Ganon portion of the fight, but it's so much better this time, as you actually ride on Zelda's dragon to fight him, and the whole thing looks way cooler than this garbage. Unfortunately, it's still easy as shit, and it was like impossible to actually get hurt by him. But at least it looked cool, and I don't know why, but this explosion at the end was just really pleasant to look at. Rauru and Minoru plot armor Zelda back into herself, and you fall through the sky to catch her, which is a nice reunion. Other than that, you just see characters who you didn't care about drifting off to hell or wherever it is they go. As a full game, it's like they had 5 or 6 really good ideas, maybe 7, and then just dropped them all in a bucket and shook it. For everything that's cool AF, there's a detrimental flaw, whether it's how that thing is presented or how the story ties into it or how much it actually matters at all. And while they did do a lot, they really didn't do enough in my book. They did a lot in certain areas and not enough in others, and the a lot they did do doesn't always amount to much. If a year was spent on polishing so that on the rare occasion I decide to fuse a mushroom to a sword, I'm like, oh shit, this actually does something. But during that same year of polishing, you couldn't take time to mix up the very limited and mediocre cutscenes a bit, or maybe add more of them in a more understandable way, or I don't know, made anything happen with the original Zonai ruins at all, other than a floating island above them to get a robot that's barely helpful in the slightest bit. But even just polishing the world to make it more unique from the last one and not feel still so damn dead and empty everywhere. Because I stopped caring about exploring most of the time after I realized it's basically the same, but with these few added features. The few places where the new storylines were added, I don't know, I still didn't care to finish. Not even Kakariko Village, which is a big part of the game. Yet I didn't even find a compelling reason to talk about it until now. That might be because the story the village is telling is so tied into the distant, long dead past, confusing and generic story of the history of Hyrule that I've already been given in so many tiny bite-sized mixed up doo-doo balls at this point that I didn't even care to put them back together in my mind in order. It's just a mess. And if this is the format for future Zelda games, I can be fine with that. If we can once again try to correct these issues, and if they can't, then shrink the world down again. I give Nintendo credit for all they've done with this game and what I'm sure they'll do with future games, but looking at the reviews, I feel like everyone was just paid off because there's no fucking way. And the big question remains, was this worth $70? And is it worth being the first $70 game?
No. Hell no.
I enjoyed it, but I don't know if I'll ever play it again. Maybe I will, I don't know. But it doesn't leave a lasting impression or an urge to do more of the gameplay, and the story is just ugh. It might just be redundant at this point to even say it because damn near everyone in the world purchased the opening week off of nothing but hype and we're giving it undeserved perfect scores. So me saying don't waste your money over half a year later is a waste of time. But I was never going to convince anyone anyway because that's how Zelda games work. Once upon a time, Nintendo had to break gaming and would get a 99 or even a 95. Now they just ball up a previous project and throw it back at you with new ideas scribbled all over it that barely fit together and take half a decade to even do that. Yet they get their dicks infinitely sucked for this low effort and somehow receive a higher score than their previous sequel that was borderline groundbreaking. Fusion is a great mechanic, but I don't see what it has to do with whatever the game is actually struggling to be. Why did the Zonai have this ability? Time reversal is useful until it's not. Ascend makes the most sense coming from the Zonai, and that ability made it in the game by accident. Zonai tech is cool, but you literally don't need it to play the game. You don't really have to visit the Sky Islands other than the temples. You don't need to visit the depths other than for this one robot that you don't even need. The Yiga can be completely ignored in the game. I've ignored them for this whole review. You don't need to find auto build. The point I'm making here is that all of these decent ideas are held together with bubblegum in this game. In Breath of the Wild, most of the game features were a service to the world, and then the world itself was the game. The identity wasn't exploring this huge world out in the wild. What's the identity of Tears of the Kingdom? And how does a game with no identity get a 10 out of 10 or called Game of the Year by people before they've even played it? I guess it's just time to look forward to the next mainline Zelda, but since Nintendo takes a minimum of 5 years per game and doesn't listen to their fans or care about them, I'm not going to hold my breath.